Hello and welcome to Business Lifeline, your fortnightly dose of corporate calamity and financial faceplants, covering all the glorious insolvency news from the 2 weeks to the 16th of June 2025. Yes, it's a barrel of laughs. This week we're calling our little show The Cost Squeeze When Margins Collapse, Even Giants Can Fall. Because, frankly, watching big companies wobble is a national pastime. Right up there with complaining about the weather and pretending to enjoy Eurovision. And right now, the economic weather forecast is biblical. I'm Paul Brindley, and for the last 40 years, I've been the person you call when the financial ship isn't just taking on water, it's actively trying to become a submarine. I'm a licensed insolvency practitioner, which is a fancy way of saying I help directors navigate the corporate equivalent of a Category 5 hurricane. Whether it's a dramatic rescue mission, a dignified farewell, or just figuring out where the emergency exits are, I've seen it all. And let me tell you, the storm clouds are gathering. This week, our theme is the cost squeeze, and it's a real boa constrictor of a problem. You've got rising wage bills, which is great for workers until the business can't afford them. You've got national insurance hikes, which is the government enthusiastically taking a bigger slice of a shrinking pie. And you have a tax burden that feels less like a burden and more like being asked to carry a grand piano upstairs. When all that squeezes your margins until they're thinner than a supermodel's alibi, even the sturdiest, most established firms can suddenly find themselves on the floor. So let's poke around the wreckage, shall we? Let's kick off with a story that's as British as a disappointing seaside holiday, British Steel. Specifically the Scunthorpe plant, which the government has just dramatically taken over in an emergency nationalisation. Yes, nationalisation. The political hot potato that we all thought was buried in the 1980s has been dug up, microwaved and served to us lukewarm. This isn't so much a bold new policy as it is the government finding a massive failing industrial plant on its doorstep like an unwanted kitten and having no choice but to take it in. So why did this happen? Well, British Steel, owned by the Chinese firm Jinyi Group, was essentially holding out a begging bowl asking for hundreds of millions in government aid to stay afloat. They pointed to skyrocketing energy costs, the price of carbon credits, which is basically a tax for the crime of existing as a steel plant, and intense competition from overseas. The government, faced with the potential loss of thousands of jobs in a region that can ill afford it, blinked. They triggered something called the Steel Industry Special Measures Act, which is a dusty piece of legislation that essentially says, if this all goes horribly wrong, the Queen, or now King, gets a steelworks. Think of it like this. Your neighbour's house is on fire. They can't afford the water bill to put it out, and the fire is threatening to spread to your prize-winning petunias. Do you hand them a bucket, or do you just buy the whole flaming mess and deal with it yourself? The government chose the latter. This isn't a vote of confidence in state ownership. It's a panicked reaction to market failure on a colossal scale. It's the economic equivalent of pulling the emergency brake on a train that's already halfway off a cliff. The implications here are fascinatingly terrifying for other private firms. This sets a precedent. If you're a business deemed strategically important, a term so vague it could mean anything from a microchip factory to a company that makes the really good biscuits, the government might just step in. But don't think of this as a get-out-of-jail-free card. This is the nuclear option. It's an admission that the private sector model in this specific high-cost, globally competitive industry has failed. The state isn't your friendly investor, it's the undertaker. So what's the advice for other businesses watching this? First, don't assume the cavalry is coming. British Steel is a unique case due to its size, political sensitivity, and the thousands of jobs at stake. Your mid-sized widget factory in Slough probably doesn't qualify. You need to look at your own cost base with the ruthless pragmatism of a hawk eyeing a field mouse. Are your energy contracts fit for purpose? Are you stress testing your finances against further cost hikes? Because the government isn't your safety net. Ultimately, the British Steel saga is a stark warning. It shows that systemic cost pressures can become so overwhelming that they break the entire system. It's a reminder that when the fundamentals of an industry are broken, when you can't make a product for a price the market will pay, no amount of private ownership or government intervention can magically fix it. It's like trying to sell ice to Eskimos when the Eskimos have discovered central heating. The entire business model needs a rethink, not just a bailout. And now for a story about healthcare, specifically the bit of healthcare you interact with when you're not sure if your ailment requires an ambulance or just a cup of tea and a lie down. I'm talking about NHS 111. The service itself is, of course, a national treasure. But the company we're talking about, Totally PLC, which ran a huge chunk of it, has just, well, totally collapsed. It has entered administration, leaving a trail of confused patients, unemployed staff, and shareholders staring at stock certificates now worth less than the paper they're printed on. Totally PLC was an AIM-listed company, which, for those not in the know, is the London Stock Exchange's market for smaller, growing companies. Think of it as the Premier League's feisty younger brother, the Championship. The problem is sometimes those high-flying teams get relegated with spectacular speed. Totally's big problem was the loss of a major NHS 111 contract. They were outbid, and without that colossal steady stream of government cash, their entire financial structure fell apart like a wet paper bag full of bricks. The company's board tried to put a brave face on it, talking about significant financial challenges and a comprehensive strategic review. This is corporate speak for we are in a screaming head-on-fire panic. They tried to find a buyer, they tried to secure new funding, but nobody wanted to touch them. Why? Because their business model was fundamentally flawed. It was a unicycle. It had one big wheel, the NHS contract. And when that wheel came off, the whole thing toppled over. There was no plan B. Could this have been avoided? Hindsight is a wonderful, if cruel, thing. A more diversified business, one not so utterly dependent on a single client, even a client as big as the NHS, would have had a fighting chance. It's Business 101. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, especially if that basket is being held by a government department that is perpetually looking for ways to save money. The second they find someone who'll do your job for tuppence less, you're out. It's brutal. This is a massive red flag for any other company whose main client is the public sector. The government is not a loyal customer. It is a pathologically frugal one. It has to be taxpayers' money and all that. So if your business model is win a big government contract and ride it into the sunset, you need to be constantly aware that the sunset might arrive a lot sooner than you think. You need reserves. You need other clients. You need a strategy for what happens when the tender renewal letter doesn't land on your doormat. The real victims here, beyond the shareholders who gambled and lost, are the staff and potentially the public. Handing over essential services to private companies can bring efficiency, or so the theory goes. But it also introduces the risk of corporate failure. When a company whose job is to direct sick people to the right medical care suddenly vanishes, that's not just an entry in an insolvency ledger. It's a genuine public health concern. Totally PLC's collapse isn't just a business story, it's a warning about the fragility of outsourcing our lifelines. From the high-tech world of healthcare contracting, we now move to something far more visceral, the rumble of a diesel engine on an open road. We're talking about haulage, the circulatory system of our economy, and one of its arteries just got clogged. The Nottinghamshire-based firm B.B. Taylor & Sons, a family-run business that had been on the road for over 50 years, has closed its doors for good, entering liquidation and taking 75 jobs with it. This isn't a flashy tech unicorn imploding. This is the slow, grinding death of a company that was part of the furniture of British industry. The reasons given for the collapse are a textbook example of our theme, the cost squeeze. The director cited the soaring cost of fuel, the introduction of the Nottingham Clean Air Zone, which slaps charges on older, more polluting vehicles, and a general downturn in the volume of work available. It was a perfect storm. Imagine you're trying to run a marathon, but someone keeps increasing the price of your running shoes, putting hurdles in your path, and then telling you the finish line has been moved 10 miles further away. At some point, you just stop running. B. Taylor & Sons was a multi-generational family business. These are the kinds of companies that are supposed to be resilient. They have deep roots, loyal staff, and a history that they're immensely proud of. But pride and history don't pay the diesel bill. They don't magically make your 10-year-old lorry compliant with new emission standards. The emotional toll of closing a business like this is immense. It's not just a balance sheet. It's a family legacy being erased. So what could have been done differently? It's tough. The haulage industry operates on notoriously thin margins. It's a high-volume, low-margin game. When your two biggest costs, fuel and vehicles, are subject to massive external price shocks and regulatory changes, your ability to maneuver is incredibly limited. Perhaps a faster pivot to a more modern, compliant fleet could have helped, but that requires huge capital investment at a time when cash is already tight. It's a classic catch-22. You need to spend money to save money, but you don't have the money to spend. This story is a microcosm of the pressures facing thousands of small and medium-sized enterprises, or SMEs, across the country. These aren't massive, faceless corporations. They are the bedrock of local economies. They are vulnerable to every single economic headwind. They don't have teams of lobbyists in Westminster or armies of accountants looking for tax loopholes. They have a director, probably the founder's grandson, sitting at a kitchen table at 2 a.m. trying to figure out how to make payroll. The lesson for other hauliers and similar SMEs is brutal but simple. You cannot afford to be complacent. You must be constantly forecasting, constantly modeling what happens if your costs go up by another 10, 20 or 50%. You need to have frank conversations with your bank and your creditors before you hit the wall, not after. And you have to make hard decisions early. Delaying the inevitable, hoping that things will just get better, is rarely a winning strategy. For B. Taylor & Sons, the road simply ran out. Now, from the gritty reality of grease and diesel, we rocket into the ethereal world of tech startups, where valuations are based on dreams and the coffee is free. Our subject is Builder.ai, a so-called unicorn, a private company valued at over $1 billion, or at least it was, because this particular magical creature has just been revealed to be, well, not quite so magical. It's fallen into insolvency after a spectacular unraveling that involves overinflated revenues and some very questionable accounting. Builder.ai's pitch was seductive. It claimed to use artificial intelligence to make building software as easy as ordering a pizza. No coding knowledge needed. Just drag, drop, and let the AI do the heavy lifting. It was a fantastic idea that attracted huge investment from big names like Microsoft and the Qatar Investment Authority. The problem, it seems, is that the story they were selling to investors was a little more artificial and a little less intelligent than advertised. The core of the issue appears to be a massive overstatement of revenue. An investigation revealed that the company was booking the full value of long-term contracts as immediate revenue, which is accounting's equivalent of telling everyone you've won the lottery because you've bought a ticket. This practice, sometimes called aggressive revenue recognition, paints a wildly optimistic picture of a company's health. It's like a fitness influencer using Photoshop. The image looks great, but the reality is much flabbier and less sustainable. When the truth came out, confidence evaporated faster than a puddle in the Sahara. The funding taps were turned off, and without a constant IV drip of investor cash, the company's high burn rate model was exposed. It turned out the unicorn was really just a horse with a traffic cone strapped to its head. The company is now in the hands of administrators who are trying to salvage something from the wreckage for creditors, while the founders and investors are left pointing fingers and nursing huge losses. This is a cautionary tale about the dark side of the growth at all costs Silicon Valley mindset. In the race to achieve unicorn status, basic principles of good governance and sound financial oversight can get thrown out the window. The focus becomes the narrative, the story you tell investors, rather than the underlying reality of the business. Are you actually profitable? Do you have a sustainable business model? Those questions get pushed aside in favor of how big is our valuation. And are we in tech crunch this week? The lesson here is universal. Whether you're a tech startup or a corner shop, your numbers have to be real. You cannot build a sustainable business on hype and financial sleight of hand. Eventually, reality will bite. For directors and founders, this is a stark reminder of your duties. You are responsible for ensuring the financial statements are true and fair. Getting creative with the accounts isn't just bad practice. It can be illegal and will inevitably lead to ruin. Builder.ai didn't just build apps, it built a house of cards, and the slightest breeze of scrutiny blew it all down. Finally, we turn to a story that affects millions of us every single day: water. Specifically, Thames Water, the company responsible for the taps and toilets of 15 million people. And folks, the situation there is less of a gentle stream and more of a full-blown sewage spill. The company, already drowning in £18 billion of debt, has seen a planned £4 billion rescue funding package from its own shareholders fall apart, pushing it to the very brink of a special administration. The story is a masterclass in corporate dysfunction. For years, Thames Water has been criticised for leaking pipes, polluting rivers with sewage and paying out massive dividends to its foreign owners, while failing to invest in its own infrastructure. It's the business equivalent of a landlord who collects rent every month but refuses to fix the gaping hole in the roof. The regulator, Ofwat, finally started to lose patience, signalling that it would be imposing stricter rules and smaller price increases, making it harder for the company to make a profit. This is what spooked the shareholders. They had pledged £750 million in emergency funding, with billions more to follow, but on one condition: that the regulatory environment was favourable. When Ofwat indicated it was going to play hardball, the shareholders picked up their ball and went home. They refused to inject the cash, claiming the business was uninvestable. This is an astonishing statement. The owners of a critical monopoly are essentially saying, if you don't let us make enough money, we'll let the whole thing collapse. This leaves the company in an incredibly precarious position. It now faces the prospect of a special administration regime, or SAR. This is the same mechanism used for failed banks. It's basically a temporary nationalisation to ensure the taps don't run dry while the government figures out what on earth to do. It's a measure of last resort, a sign of catastrophic failure in a privatised utility. It means the taxpayer will likely be on the hook to clean up a mess created by decades of private mismanagement and greed. The broader lessons here are profound. This is about more than just one water company. It's about the fundamental contract between a privatized utility and the public it serves. If a company is given a monopoly to provide an essential service, it has a duty to invest, to maintain its assets, and to comply with the rules. Thames Water appears to have failed on all counts. Its corporate structure is a labyrinth of offshore companies, making it hard to see where the money actually goes. For any business in a regulated industry, the message is crystal clear: you cannot ignore your compliance and social responsibilities. Regulators have teeth, and they are increasingly willing to use them. Trying to play chicken with the government over an essential public service is a high-risk game you are likely to lose. Resilience isn't just about having a healthy balance sheet, it's about having a sustainable, ethical business model that regulators and the public can trust. Thames Water lost that trust, and now it's sinking. And that's it for this fortnight's Business Lifeline. What a cheerful roundup, eh? From the foundational industries of water and steel to the modern-day essentials of tech and transport, the message is hammering home with all the subtlety of a bailiff at the door. Rising costs are not just trimming the fat, they are carving into the bone, stripping away the resilience of British business. It doesn't matter if you're a 50-year-old family firm or a billion-dollar innovator with a fancy coffee machine. In this environment, nobody is too big or too new to fail. The common thread through all these stories, from the Scunthorpe steelworks to the leaky pipes of London, is that staying afloat requires more than just a good idea or a proud history. It demands constant vigilance, a ruthless understanding of your costs, and the adaptability to change course when the storm hits. And sometimes it requires making incredibly tough, painful decisions, the kind of decisions that keep you awake at night, but which might just keep the business alive for the morning. So if any of this sounds uncomfortably familiar, if you're feeling that cost squeeze tightening around your own business, please remember that getting advice early can be the difference between a managed landing and a crater. You don't have to face these pressures alone. There are lifelines out there, but you have to be willing to grab one. Thanks for listening, and please, for your own sake, join us in 2 weeks for our next podcast. It's bound to be just as uplifting.